So a friend of mine who is very committed, progressive, he went down to work for one of the politicians in Washington, elected representatives, who is very publicly committed to the issue. And it was a great surprise to this person to find out that privately, while publicly this representative would say, we have to cut back on our motor use, we have to cut back on our fuel change, and would suggest that we could help solve it by our behavior. In private, they said something very different. And then when they were talking to other people in the Senate, they were saying a very different thing, which is that they all expect the gadget will solve it. Once you understand that, you understand a lot about how things have worked on this issue.
Welcome to How We Change the World podcast. I'm your host, Deborah Rowan, and I am eager to introduce you to my special guest today, author David Lipsky. Now, David Lipsky is often described as having this keen intellect and this ability to explore subjects and present very complex subjects in a accessible and a very compelling manner, which he does not only in his writing, but he also does on this podcast today, as we talk about the topic of his new book, The Parrot and the Igloo, Climate and the Science of Denial. Now, many of you who value engaging and thoughtful books and journalism as well will likely know the name David Lipsky, because in addition to his multiple books that he's written, his work has also appeared in Rolling Stone, Harper's Magazine, The New Yorker, The New York Times, and they all showcase his versatility and depth as a writer. Now, David is also a contributing editor at Rolling Stone Magazine, and he's a contributor at All Things Considered on NPR, National Public Radio, and he also teaches creative writing at New York University. Now, David's literary career is a whole story unto itself. It began with his first book he wrote when he was very young, titled $3,000, which was a collection of stories that earned him these rave reviews and comparisons to F. Scott Fitzgerald. His second book was titled The Art Fair, and it explores the relationship between a New York artist and her precocious son. His mother happens to be a New York artist, and, well, you draw the conclusion. The novel was named Time Magazine Best Book of the Year. David wrote the nonfiction book Absolutely American next, and he did that after spending 4 years at West Point, living with and studying the cadets and writing about the lives of these West Point cadets. And the New York Times called it, it was a New York Times bestseller. It was a New York Times notable book. It was Amazon Best Book of the Year, and it was Time Magazine Best Book of the Year. By 2010, David published one of his best books, titled Although, of Course, You End Up Becoming Yourself. And this was a profound and insightful account of his 5-day road trip that he took with the late beloved American author, David Foster Wallace. This book was later adapted into a feature film, and the title of which was The End of the Tour, where my guest David Lipsky was portrayed by none other than Jesse Eisenberg, and Wallace was portrayed by Jason Segel. And the film received widespread acclaim for its poignant and profound depiction of the two writers' conversations. And you can even watch it now on Amazon Prime, it's on Apple, it's on Cinemax, it's a number of places where you can stream it. So, David's latest book, which we talk about today, is The Parrot and the Igloo, Climate and the Science of Denial. And this book is a narrative history of the climate science and the denial movement, a very real thing, this denial movement. And this book has been described as simultaneously captivating and disturbing, which I also discovered. It offers a thorough and historical record of how climate denial has taken root in this country and around the world. So please join me now as we explore the mind and the work of my guest, David Lipsky. Hello and welcome. Today I have the pleasure, I should say, of speaking with an acclaimed novelist and nonfiction writer, David Lipsky. And welcome to How We Change the World podcast, David.
Thanks, Deborah. I have the pleasure of speaking with you. So anyway, please.
Mutual. Well, yeah. We'll see. We'll see if that bears out. So I don't normally read people's bios, and I'm not going to read it, but I kind of have to refer to notes because I don't want to really miss anything on yours. You have such an impressive resume, shall we say, and so just indulge me for a moment on that. Well, I just learned that you're a contributing writer. You have been an editor at Rolling Stone magazine. Now you're a contributing writer. Your fiction and your nonfiction has appeared in many, many places, but just the ones that people know: the New York Times, the New Yorker, Harper's, New York Times Book Review. So many others. You're a contributor to NPR All Things Considered, which I haven't heard you, and I'm going to go look for you now that I know that. It's one of my favorites. And you're also the recipient of a Lambert Fellowship, a Media Award from GLAAD, and a National Magazine Award. And that's like without even mentioning I think 7, or is this 8 books now that you've written?
I think it depends on if you're using a digital base 10 or if you're digital counting or base 10. It's different. I think it's 7 or 8. Yeah.
Okay. Wow. When you start losing track, then I guess it's not that you've lost track. It's just a matter of how you count them. But so I'll just mention a couple of them.
Wait, Deborah. Before we go on though, there's a really interesting thing, which is that there's been a controversy among linguists as to how we learn to count. And so one of the ideas is that cultures that are sort of pre-literate or pre-written language, that they use a 1, 2, and then many system of counting. So for example, with dogs, if you're like there must be a lot of grant money flowing around, because with dogs, they will often do tests of how do dogs count. Like crows can count fairly high. Dogs, if you give them a plate that has 2 biscuits or 1 biscuit, they go to the one with 2. And if you give them one with 3 and one with 2, they'll go to the one with 3. But they can't differentiate above like 4 or 5. Like they just see that it's many. So if you have a plate with 4 biscuits and one with like 6 or 7 biscuits, it's harder for them to determine. They just see a lot of biscuits. And so one of the ideas, there's a tribe in the Amazon called it's very difficult to pronounce, called the Pirahu. Okay. And they are one of the few remaining cultures that still seems to have a 1, 2, and then many system of counting. Although there is some debate as to whether they may just conceptualize numbers differently. However, so we look down on that as kind of a gag. However, I found that is our internal programming. Oh. But what's funny about it is that it just seems to me the way everyone I know who is hailing a cab while they are looking at their phone, however technologically advanced, being able to do those physical and digital things at once, however advanced that is, that's how they count everything. Like, I don't know, there's some sushi left. Or especially with things like movies, like I can name title and year for filmmakers up until when they get to like 3 or 4 movies. Mm-hmm. And then I'm just like, they've done a lot of movies. And so I noticed I noticed with this book, I was like, I'm not sure anymore how many books I've written. Right. That's great.
Interesting. Yeah. I see how you pulled this all. So what I'm wondering though, is it a mathematical brain that really likes to be precise? Does it have something to do with a literary brain versus a mathematical brain?
No, but I realized why it was interesting to me, because I was thinking about it throughout the time that I was working on this book. See, it seemed like it was digression, but it wasn't. Like, one of the things that's hard for us, and it's what makes Twitter really hard for us too. Do you ever go on X, formerly known as Twitter? I always think of Prince. Yes. Yeah, I always think of the artist formerly known as Twitter.
I know,
but when you're seeing 1,000 people saying, I don't know, Trump is great, you think, wow, the country is shifting in Trump's direction. Mm-hmm. But it's just like, no, that's hard. It's very hard for you to count on a scale of hundreds of millions. It just seems like there's many people.
I'm hearing some wishful thinking here coming along.
But here's the other thing, which is just that really came into play with the people who are known as the deniers. because when you saw that there were never that many deniers, but when you saw that there were 10 or 11 scientists who were saying something, and the deniers learned to use this when you saw that there had been a petition, and the petition was signed by 100 scientists, although it turned out half of them were weathermen, or if you said it was signed by 30,000 scientists, that would seem like a lot to our lizardy
Right.
non-Pirahu brains or our lizardy Pirahu brains. But in fact, when you then learned that there were 1.6 million college graduates annually who have science degrees, then you understood that was a very small number. So in fact,
relativity matters.
It's not just relative. It's something that the bad people have profited by, is our inability really to judge which plate has more biscuits on it. We just see there's a lot of biscuits.
You did a very good job of bringing that together. But here's the penalty you're going to pay for not staying on script, because now I'm going to skip over the names of all your books and get into the book that you just referred to, because
no, you had some beautiful intro and I want you to keep going. But I'm teasing. Please go ahead. Okay.
Well, you just were talking about deniers, and people are going to, what the heck are we talking about? So, among your 7 or 8 or gazillion books that you've written, perhaps you're most well known for, although of course you end up being yourself, a great title, which is about a road trip that you took with one of the country's most influential writers, David Foster Wallace. There was a movie about that made, played by, who plays you?
Jesse Eisenberg.
Yeah, I mean, who could you ask for that? That must have been a home run for you to have him play you.
I did ask for him. So
you did?
That was
they actually listened to the writer.
Yeah, it was nice. The people were really warm on the people. There were always horror stories about film sets and film people.
Right.
But this was just the reverse. It was like thinking it was going to be Nightmare on Elm Street, and it was Terms of Endearment. And it was they were so kind and warm and great.
Really? So did you write the screenplay for that?
No,
or work on it?
A very strong playwright named Donald Margulies, who is a Pulitzer Prize-winning playwright.
Nice.
But he was extremely open, and they were sensitive to my caring about making things extremely accurate, because that book is about as nonfiction as something can get. It's just David and I talking.
Yeah. Well, just so listeners know, these things are all these links to these movies and to the books will all be on the show notes. So I definitely going to find that movie soon, because I have not seen that movie. So alas, we finally arrive at the book we want to talk about today, which is really, first of all, I know not everybody likes to hold up the book, but you hadn't even seen this before today. So you saw the hardback, but the paperback's coming out in a couple weeks, in late June or sometime in June.
Yeah, middle of June.
Somehow I got a copy before you did, so you wanted me to show it to you. So I
really appreciate that, but they like you better than they like me.
We'll see about that. Yeah. So it's called The Parrot and the Igloo, Climate and the Science of Denial. And not only do I love this book, and I already told you I'm giving it as a gift, especially now that it's in paperback, to many, many people that have, especially some people who don't want to talk about climate change that much, or don't have the energy for it, or don't think they have the scientific background for it, because this is so accessible, and that's really what we're going to be talking about the rest of the show. But the title is awesome. I know, first of all, the main title, The Parrot and the Igloo, you have 2 epilogues in the book. You save the meaning of the parrot and the igloo for the epilogue, which I take issue with, because I think it sets up the whole understanding of the book. I mean, it's not a secret anymore, so you can either share that now or not, or people can read the whole book and then get to the end and find out what it's about. But it's really well named.
Thanks very much. I appreciate it. It was very fun. It was extremely fun coming up with the title.
Yeah.
And then the title is built into the story. So, when I was thinking about the many ways, like if you go to a party, you can tell a story in a number of ways. And so when I was thinking, how do I find a way I love, when we were in the green room together, we were talking about movies and TV shows. I love movies and TV shows, and I wanted this story to be as fun as those, because it's worth our knowing the story, but it tends to be hard to read. And so when I was trying to figure out the best way to tell it, I began thinking, I'll use the thing of how we went from a parrot to an igloo.
And the subject which we're talking about is climate change, that, people don't find it that accessible, the conversation about climate change or global warming, which is another conversation we'll have about the nomenclature,
of course,
which I don't see exactly like you do. So we'll be sure and get to that. But I love the science of denial. The juxtaposition of those words is brilliant and scary, because it turns out it is a bit of a science. They have made a science out of denying climate change in some ways, or an art, or a combination, or
they became very skilled at it. There's no question about it, and I'm really pleased that you like that. I've been holding back because, again, this was a conversation we had in the green room, but I'll just go ahead.
Go ahead.
So there's a great writer, Nabokov. Do you know he wrote that book Lolita? Which
sure,
has its
it's an old one,
has its demerits.
Yeah.
But he said he's a great writer. He's like
he's a Russian writer.
He's Russian American. But he I don't know. He's like Tarantino in that he is, he suffuses himself with words. It's Quentin Tarantino is the same way with movies, and is just thrillingly fun. Anyway, he said this great thing. He said that as a writer, what you want to have is the passion of the scientist and the precision of the poet, which I thought was kind of great.
Beautiful. And so it really is beautiful.
Yeah, it's the same kind of gag. Like, they got really, really good at lying, and unfortunately, it's to everyone's bad luck, to everyone's misfortune. The ability to lie professionally really reached an apogee just at the moment that this issue of climate changing matured as a political question.
Yeah.
That's an interest killer, a phrase like that. Matured as a political question. Anyway, please keep going.
Well, sometimes the truth is not pleasant. Yeah. I like the word apogee, though. That was a good one. And you do talk a lot in the book about how we've had so much bad luck with the solving of climate change. Yeah. Bad luck, it seems like such a understatement, but there's a lot of intentional denial, which we'll talk about, some of these intentional deniers, professional deniers of climate change science. But yeah, it's an upsetting subject, because there is bad luck, there's intentionality, and then there's just the reality that we're dealing with, that we don't know how to fix this thing, even though we're 70 years into knowing about it. So anyway, so many different ways to go about this story. There was so many ways you could have written this book. It took you, it's almost 500 pages. It took you, I think I've heard 7 years. I've heard you say you don't want to talk about it. I spent almost 10 years on a novel, so I know the feeling when you get into something so big and you don't know how to pull it all down, or you want all these stories in there. But the editing on this was really good too, because there's not a dull page in here. And I think, not one. And I had two confessions at the beginning of this, so I'll just share with the audience too, that this is a book that you can pick up and just scroll through, find different chapters, which I wasn't able to read every page in it because I didn't have the raw time between when the interview was scheduled and when we came on. I am going to go back and read it slowly and methodically, because it's wonderful. And everything that I read, I'm like, God, I wish I could just keep going. But I just want to say, for the outline of it, it's like basically divided into 3 sections and 2 epilogues, right?
That's right.
You start with do you want to talk about how you laid it out?
I love hearing you talk about it. No, I'll do it. No, you're asking me. Forgive me.
I'm happy to do. No, it's okay.
I'm your guest, so let me. So
make you do some work.
I divided it. I divided it into 3 sections just because there are 3 different things that happened, which is climate change. Basically, is a problem. I've sometimes wondered if it'd be easier for people just to really deal with. It's been so difficult to get people. Now, it'll be really fun to talk about why it's been difficult, but it's been so difficult to get people not to focus, but to get them to figure out that focusing can be helpful. That Yale has a department, which is the Yale School of Climate Change Communication.
Oh, really?
They have a program because it's so hard to get across things about this. Yeah. And the basic thing is in the mid '90s, when it was clear what this was going to be,
Mm-hmm.
a guy at MIT said, if you wanted to come up with a problem that human institutions just aren't designed to deal with, that they can't deal with, you couldn't pick a better one than climate change.
Mm.
But it's something that just wouldn't have occurred without everything that's great about the way we live. Like I'm looking through my computer at the window over your left shoulder.
Mm-hmm.
That's an amazing feat that would have been science fiction at the place where the book begins with the inventors around 1812. That's an amazing thing, part of the bargain that we had to make. And that bargain, the contracts were all signed up and they were drawn and they were proofread and they were signatured before we were born. But the contract that we're living by is that to get the ability for me to look at a piece of glass in New York and to see a car going out your window and there's someone walking right by talking on their phone, all those things produce a kind of temperature pollution, a kind of weather pollution.
Yeah.
So of course you have to begin with the people who changed the world, basically Thomas Edison and Nikola Tesla. And it's also kind of great to write about them because it's going to require a certain kind of inventiveness to get out of this problem. And it's great to know that tremendous focused human ingenuity brought us into the problem. So it first tells the story of how we got our modern world, and then says part two, and it says the scientists, and then those are the people who realized, there might be a problem with this. And that was also a tremendous, for me, researching and then telling the story, tremendous testimony to human ingenuity, because incredible detectives getting just a scattering of clues. It's not even CSI, it's just SI, or just the C, but a very small number of clues, and they're like, something is happening. And then depending on how you count it, but here in America, over about a 70-year period, they absolutely verified it. And then the third part of the story, so those are
be more specific in what they clarified, that human activity is creating a warmer climate, which is creating climate change,
that human activity could change the climate. Right, that it was. But first you had to have the theory that it could, because that hadn't occurred to anybody. Right. And that was amazing to figure that out. Like, it is a testament to the same human ability that Edison developing the light bulb and developing our power grid is. And so then the third section of the story, so people who made our world, second section, people who knew there might be a problem or who sensed there might be a problem.
The scientists, right.
And then the third are the deniers, the people who lied about that problem.
Yeah.
And one of the dark smiles in the book, it's a little bit like when the most popular character from Star Wars weirdly is Darth Vader, right? Yeah. That is the most recognizable figure. Weirdly, the deniers show human ingenuity too, in a sort of fascinating, disturbing way, because they frustrated the planetary desire to take action on this issue for about 25 years, for 30 years, and there's a very small number. There are not more than 25. Yeah, but there's not more than 25 of them. And so imagine that 25 people, that's like some amazing Guns of Navarone World War II type movie. It's like Inglourious Bastards. It's a tiny platoon of people who went out and changed everybody's minds for a time about whether this was happening or not. So anyway, that's how the book is designed.
Well, for a time is a questionable statement. Like, you look at Ron DeSantis this week has said that you can't mention climate change in government documents or something, like things that we're in 2024. So the deniers are not just 24. And in fact, they've become a part of our 50 of the culture war, which is something we can get into, is like there's a power in denying the science. I mean, we're still denying science. This is not, you have a history of all these people denying science over the decades, especially in the 2000s. But now, how do we? That number's a lot bigger than 25.
Well, no, was actually I said it was one of the main deniers when he was interviewed just being interviewed by a pleasant journalist, and it's not someone from his side. It was a journalist from Popular Science. So someone that it wasn't inside baseball. It wasn't a baseball team manager talking to Sports Illustrated.
Yeah.
It was a baseball team manager talking to the Cleveland Plain Dealer or talking to the Times. And when this gentleman was asked, how many people are in your movement? How many scientists? And he said, there's no more than 24 of us. It's a really ragtag bunch. And that is one of the shocking things. It really was never more than about 24 scientists. Now, you're right. There are other people who use those scientists, but it was always the same 24 people being quoted.
I see. Yeah. So those messages have just been taken over by politicians. I mean, there's a lot I want to, I guess I kind of want to do a little bit of a chronological storytelling, if you can, as you did in the book, really, because I think there's still, I know we can't sit here and rehash the entire what went wrong with climate change, action, but still, I think there's some. It'd be nice to take a little time to just say, like, for example, you mentioned that it was in the 1850s or 1890s, and I've read this in Paul Hawkins' book too.
Your memory is great. It's in both. So here's how long we've known. Most people have the idea that it is in maybe 1990s, because that's when they first started hearing about it. And some people will think that it's the discovery of Al Gore's, or that it's something that he popularized and made important to scientists. But Gore's story, which we'll work our way back to, is actually a great story about how education can work. Essentially, one of his professors at school was the first great American climate scientist, or the first great American warming scientist. But the actual science is the other thing, which is, and this is the tremendous achievement of the various Lex Luthors and Norman Osborns in the denial movement, is to make it seem that it was sort of a fringe thing, that it was alternative science. But
junk
it was
science.
It was always. By the way, the phrase "junk science," I hope that your viewers could see me wince on that. That's become a standard term, but that was one of the inventions. That's part of the phrase "junk science" is a product of the science of denial.
No, it's a weapon. Yeah. It's a weapon.
Exactly, it's a weaponized phrase.
Yeah.
Okay, so
I use it facetious. I mean, I use it in that term.
Because one of the weird things is I'll see it now in the Atlantic Monthly or the Times. People just using that phrase, having no idea.
Sorry.
Shocking. Shocking, isn't it? But tremendously effective.
Yeah.
So it goes back to 1824 is the first time.
Oh, 24, really?
There's an interesting question. How sciencey do you want me to get, Deborah?
Yeah, we'll go for it.
Okay. So there was a guy named Joseph Baptiste Fourier, and he was the leading French mathematician of his era. So we're going all the way back.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's kind of like if you want to know where it really starts, right? Like the very,
Deborah,
very beginning.
I wanted to go even farther back to Napoleon.
Oh, so, okay. I'm drawing a line.
No, because it's fascinating. Like, this story is inscribed in our story for really the last almost 2.25 centuries. 1802, Napoleon he's going on his voyage to Egypt to relieve the British of Egypt. And part of the excuse is that it's also a scientific mission. So he gets France's leading scientists and mathematicians, and he loads them on a boat along with his invasion force, and they all go to Egypt. And one of the things that happened, so Fourier just was always a very promising mathematician. He is made both the secretary of the scientific mission, and he's also like the mayor of Lower Egypt. He's one of the leaders of Lower Egypt during France's occupation of Egypt. And he gets really fascinated by heat, because about half of Napoleon's force succumbs in different ways to heat exhaustion. And it's an interesting question, like the moon and the Earth, think about it, everyone brace for some science. And science filtered through the ears and eyes of somebody who mostly watches movies and reads books. So
take it with a grain of salt.
Yeah, exactly. But the moon and the Earth are getting the same sun, but the Earth we know is very cold, and Earth isn't. And so Fourier was wondering, when the sunlight, when it hits the earth and it warms the earth up, why does the heat stay? And so he began to wonder. So when he came back from Egypt, he was a changed person in that he was always wearing coats like all year round. He would wear a coat in the summer. He'd gotten used to the intense heat in Egypt.
And so he would I thought he was trying to make a political point or something.
No. He just his internal thermometer, his thermostat was kind of thrown. Yeah. And he was just fascinated by heat. And so he began wondering what is keeping the heat in. Yeah. And so he realized that the sunlight would come down, it would heat the earth up, and then something was keeping that warmth here. Right. And so being French, he thought of it as something like the glass lid on a dish or the glass lid on a casserole dish. Something is keeping the heat on earth. Right. And he's right. So yeah, and so he had received a baronet. He was a baron. He was made a baron by Napoleon for his contributions to science. So absolutely a mainstream figure. About 40 years later, England's lead scientist, a man named John Tyndall, he was reading Fourier's 1824 publication, and he was wondering, hey, what is the thing? Fourier realized something was keeping the sun's heat here. What is it? Oh, so Fourier didn't really ever come to anything. He just asked the question, he realized, which is important first step. Yeah. And so he said, okay, let me figure out something in the atmosphere. Let me go through everything in the atmosphere. And he spent about 6 months. And again, Tyndall he's the secretary of the Royal Institution. So he is the leading scientist. Yeah, absolutely scientist of his period. Yeah. And so he's testing every atmospheric element, and he's so thorough that he has a gentleman come from Bond Street, which was the perfume district of London, bringing all the perfumes like cinnamon and sandalwood. And he's testing those. He's seeing if those are trapping heat. And so he's about to give it up because he can't find what the element is, and then sort of on a lark, he tests coal gas. In England, they had introduced gaslight. Gaslight means something different to us now, but what it meant to England was you can walk on the streets at night. You can go to night classes. Like the idea it changed the world. Everything. It changed the world. Yeah. But it was also producing coal gas. The gas was coming from heating up coal. And so he tested coal gas. And do you know when you go to a parking lot at the airport, you roll over those kinds of, they're like sort of like claws underneath the asphalt. And so when you go over them, you can feel them bounce. If you try to back up, they'll rip your tires. Oh, yeah. Yeah. That essentially is what carbon dioxide inside coal gas would do. So sunlight could go through it. When the sun heated the earth, it achieved sort of an infrared band. And so when the infrared energy tried to come out, the molecular structure of carbon dioxide kept it. And so what he discovered was water vapor. That's a great analogy. Thanks very much. But it's so visual, right? Yeah. But carbon dioxide and water vapor were keeping the Earth's heat. That's why. And he said this great thing. He said, it's as necessary to human beings as a blanket. And if you remove that blanket for even just a single night, and the sun would rise on an England in the iron grip of frost. Scientists in the 19th century had a great verbal facility as well. Yeah. So given a lot of that up. Yeah. So then he's brilliant. He said this great thing, which I always think about on this issue, but also just political issues in general. He said it is as cowardly as it is bad policy to blink facts if they are not to our taste. And what he means by blink facts is just to ignore them, to make believe they're not there. Yeah, it's a great phrase also. Yeah, it really is. He's totally, it almost hurts, it's so accurate. Yeah, and he also, another thing he said is there's a polar law about anything in human life. That something which is good for us in one regard is bad for us in another. And that's how Tyndall died. He had married late in life, and he was taking 2 different medications. One was a chloral hydrate for sleep, because pretty modern era, he had trouble sleeping and he had trouble with his digestion, and he took chloral hydrate for sleep, and he took magnesium for his digestion. And his wife, playful gesture, she would administer them. And on Christmas Day, she got the medications
Confused.
reversed. And he took a big swig of what he thought was magnesium, and it was
Oh.
chloral hydrate. And
You're supposed to only have a small amount?
Yeah, he knew instantly. And she gasped, and he said, "Yes, my dear, you have killed your John." His name was John Tyndall. So he lived out the idea that things that are good for you in one regard are bad in another.
God, these stories.
Yeah. No, but it's
you know, this is what I want to point out to people listening. This is what listening to talk is kind of like what reading this book is like, right? Because there's all this there's science. There's not that much technical science, but there's explain science, but you also have these anecdotes and these stories about all the people, whether they're the inventors or the deniers or the scientists. There's always the human dimension, because that at the end of the story is why we're where we're at.
Exactly.
It's not because CO2 works a certain way or there's a blanket, it's because of what we're doing. So,
but also we experience things as stories. This is a story that human beings live. So if you were going to tell it so that readers and movie lovers and TV lovers like ourselves could know it, and knowing it is the important thing. That's the thing that we can do if we're not doing science, or if we're not trying to invent whatever the gadget that the politicians are relying on to solve this. If we can't do those things, knowing it is the thing that we can do. So I love hearing you say that. That was what was thrilling to me in writing it. So about 34 years after Tyndall discovers that carbon dioxide...
So he was in the 50s, 1850s, yeah. So 1820, or we started earlier.
Yeah, and it's another marriage story. A man named Svante Arrhenius, he's going to become Sweden's, again, always mainstream scientist. He's going to become this first Swedish scientist to receive the Nobel, and then he will lead the Nobel laboratories. So he is as mainstream as you can get. Yeah. And when he died, the New York Times said that he was probably the most famous scientist alive when he died in the 1920s. He is the person who finally figured out how carbon dioxide, if it was raised and lowered, what the numbers would be. So he had just married, and on Christmas Eve of 1894, he sat down to work on this problem. Now, you can tell a marriage is going bad if it's in the first year and you are spending in your
Christmas
home office,
Eve.
You're spending it at work. So it took him about a year to do the calculations because there were no computers. So the kinds of calculations that could be done much more quickly and efficiently, he does by hand. He does on pencil. He does with a pencil on paper. And what he plots out is, okay, if he reads Tyndall's paper, Tyndall is right. Carbon dioxide is what keeps the sun's heat on Earth, or the sun's power on Earth. He asked himself a question that no one had asked themselves yet, which is, if you lowered it, what would happen? And if you
lowered what?
Carbon dioxide. If you had
the amount of CO2 in the air,
exactly. If you lowered it, what would happen? And if you raised it, if you halved it.
But wait, before you keep going, I just want to ask you: what was the impetus for him? Was it just scientific inquiry, or was he starting to be worried?
What a great question. No, it wasn't that he was worried. It was just that's what scientists are like. So he belonged. Okay. And one of the weird things about Tyndall, Tyndall, what's weird about Tyndall is that the thing that he loved was mountain climbing. Like, he was crazy about mountain climbing. He was the fourth climber up the Weisshorn, which is the fourth tallest of the European.
In the Alps?
Yeah.
Is this in the 50s? This is the guy in the 50s, Tyndall is in the 50s.
Yeah, Tyndall. Okay, and what Arrhenius loved was beer. Arrhenius loved hanging out with other scientists. All his friends are scientists. Yeah. He's only wanted to be a scientist his whole life, but they have societies where they will meet and they will discuss topics of scientific interest. So it's sort of like a chat group. It would sort of be like science Twitter. And so one of the things they were wondering was, what causes heat periods? What causes ice ages? So he does the research. Everyone knows about Tyndall. He reads Tyndall's thing and he says, okay, Tyndall is right, so let's try to figure out what would bring on ice ages. So if you halved carbon dioxide, essentially that would create the conditions for ice ages to return. We're only about 10,000 years outside the most recent ice age. If you doubled carbon dioxide, he discovered, again, this is a year's worth of calculating. If you doubled it, you would raise temperatures 4 to 9 degrees. one of the things that's been thrilling to scientists after in the century and more than a quarter since is that his numbers, even though they were achieved with pencil and paper and no computer, they're basically
accurate.
right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that, let me say one more thing, Deborah.
Yeah.
He thought that was good news that we could warm the climate that way because he's in Sweden. And Sweden is really cold. And so some of his science friends, they were like, why wait? Like there are all these coal mines that, they're exhausted of coal. We should go in there and we should light them on fire just to burn the coal residue, and they will produce more coal gas, and that will heat up the earth even more quickly than it otherwise would. So that was 18. Isn't it?
It's just so, it was interesting because it makes me think like that was 130 years ago. So like you think about, they're going to be looking at what we're saying now and saying they thought that this and this and this, even though we have all the technology, but just because I'm thinking, here's this guy in the 1890s when it's really the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. And I'm thinking that, he's concerned because we're putting all these pollutants out in the air. We're starting to, this is the beginning, right? Because when we talked about raising the temperature 1.5 or 2 degrees Celsius, it's from what time? It's like, the time before the Industrial Revolution. Yeah. Like that's the base. So he's in it, but he can't see that he's in it yet. He's doing the research that we need, but doesn't know why. Maybe. Doesn't know how relevant.
Scientists are. Their job is to figure out how things work without having a special feeling about it. So did you ever see the Benedict Cumberbatch Sherlock? BBC Sherlock, it's great.
Hey, I'm thinking the guy. I know. I just was thinking, who is that actor? But yes, I know who it is.
But if you see that show, like Sherlock doesn't have a feeling about the crimes he's solving. He just wants to solve them. That's one of the points.
Very logical. It's all about logic.
And so for scientists, it's often they just want to know how things work.
Right.
And
sometimes.
Yeah.
But now now we're looking at it not just because we're curious, because now we're right. But it starts that way. Yeah.
In fact, one of the things that one of the great lines about climate change from our era is in the 50s. I'm skipping ahead, and we'll make our normal progress in a second. But in the 50s, no, we're doing great. Roger Revelle said that's the one who ended up being Al Gore's professor at Harvard. He said that what we're doing now by releasing millions of years, eons of carbon dioxide, like carbon has been stored in sedentary rocks, and we are releasing it all at once. It is it's like a massive geophysical experiment that could not have occurred in the past and could not be reproduced in the future. We are releasing back into the atmosphere the stored carbon dioxide of millennia. And so a great climate writer named Bill McKibben said that was morbidly dispassionate to describe something that Revelle knew was extremely dangerous. But it's just the way scientists talk. Like you wouldn't. By the way, if you're really curious, so people who are only mildly curious, go to the fridge right now. But
I gotta excuse me. I'm getting a little hungry.
But scientists, one of the in the world of the sciences, if it seems like your research is too directed at raising attention, that's referred to as hand-waving by fellow scientists.
It's suspect, right?
Yeah, so they would say that Deborah is doing too much hand-waving in her science right now. So you're supposed to sound the other way. But actually, Arrhenius, interestingly, he was a genius. And what he began to notice, he was extremely optimistic. One of the things that people said about him was he was an optimist, as you were saying about that period, even by the standards of his own pre-World War II, pre-World War I era. But as he began looking, because he is a genius, as he began looking at the way we were consuming energy, he became very, very pessimistic. And
wait, are you saying even this is the man who died in the 1920s, right?
Yeah, exactly. So
he was pessimistic at that point?
Yeah, so he started out, he's one of the great optimists of his era. So this story is all ironies. So in the book, the book points out, it's always different talking about yourself having this wonderful conversation with you in Cherry Creek right now, and the person who was working on the book at 4 p.m, checking the facts, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, right.
But the person, the the person who wrote sorry, I got tangled up in my phrasing there. So if Deborah is very kind, she will have cut my stumble there, but I imagine
Oh,
that
no,
she
no
has.
way. Leaving it
But
all in.
yeah. But but he was seen as extremely optimistic for that period. So if you were talking to Arrhenius, what you would say is he is more optimistic than most people in 1890 or 1900. It's one of the
I'm
fascinating
confused, but
things.
what would he be optimistic about? Like,
Just in
what are
general,
you?
the march of human progress. So in the
Oh,
book,
okay, okay.
in the book, one of the points the book makes is that the history of climate change is like walking in a museum of ironies. Like one of the things that climate change tells us we should do is we should become abstemious, basically. And humans don't like being told that. They don't like being told you shouldn't drink, you shouldn't use nicotine,
Right.
you shouldn't
Of
have
course.
pizza, you
Yeah.
shouldn't splurge, and that we can splurge with our bodies, we can splurge with our appetites, we can splurge with our cars, we can splurge with airplanes going on vacation.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, this issue has become property of the anti-splurgers. So that, like, a friend of mine who is really environmentally conscious, he's in the film industry and he's going to work on a show. If you're in the movie business, you refer to both TV shows and movies as shows. So that we were talking about Terms of Endearment earlier. If you like being on the set of Terms of Endearment, you would say that was a fun show to work on.
I see. Okay.
So he was going to work on a show in Ontario, and a friend of his who's even more environmentally conscious says, I know you want to come home and see family and friends on your once a month off, but that's really bad for the environment.
Yeah.
So the research he did has become the property of anti-splurgists, but he's someone who loved being happy, basically. Like, he would have a big dinner party, and if the Northern Lights, if the Aurora Borealis were outside, he would stop the party and just shuttle everyone out so they could admire the light show.
As one should.
Yeah, no, exactly. So he's a great optimist, notably an optimist, but when he looked at energy consumption from the 1890s on, it turned him pessimistic. So the last book that he wrote, a book called Chemistry in Modern Life, he said, I want to scare people because we're using energy really badly. And he was brilliant. The interesting thing, if you have smart friends, or if you follow like smart people like Deborah or like Tarantino on YouTube, what they say about stuff will tend to be smart on topics even outside their field of expertise.
Yeah.
So what he said was, energy, the lack of resources. He said we're going to have to stop letting national organizations or for-profit industries, national egotism, and the for-profit companies. We're going to have to stop them being the people making the decisions about the use of resources, because it's leading to bad effects. And then the second thing he said, which I thought was wild, 1924. What he said was that lack of those resources, lack of things like water and oil, would be the cause of the future's wars, with the states that with the states that lack casting an envious eye on the nations that happen to have more than they can use. So this issue turned him pessimistic.
Wow, but
early,
so accurate, so accurate, and that's what's so frustrating, I think, about the whole book, is that there's such wisdom 100 years ago that we could have listened to. We had, and throughout, this is early 1900. I'm very surprised to hear that someone was that pessimistic in the early 1900s, because they hadn't suffered any of the deleterious effects of what we were doing.
Well, no, but one of the things that Arrhenius said is that, he was more optimistic than Tyndall. Tyndall turned out right. It was right that Tyndall wasn't optimistic because he died from medicine, so it kind of makes sense. But it was funny because Arrhenius would see it as the reverse. He said, even by the 1890s, people were using coal in a way that other people were like raising their eyebrows about, like, we are just running through this stuff. Yeah, so he said,
oh, but that's an issue of finiteness, right?
Exactly, but what he was saying is, it said that the current generation is being very prodigal in their use of coal, and they're not leaving it for future generations. But we can see that here, as in so many other things, when there is something bad, there's often something good about it.
Oh,
And by
yeah.
using coal in this terrible way, we're going to leave a warmer earth for the propagation of mankind. So everyone understood quickly that we used fuel in a way that was sloppy, basically, right from the
Yeah.
beginning.
Yeah.
So here's the fascinating thing so he says that it would take many centuries to double carbon dioxide. But if you did, you would raise temperatures 4 to 9 degrees. What he thought was that the ocean, two science things that are cool. The phrase sink is one that you'll hear if you get involved in reading this or watching scientists talk on
Like a
television.
carbon sink, you mean?
Okay, great. Okay, yeah. So there are two great sinks in the world.
Okay.
On land, do you know what the sinks are on land?
Well, yeah.
There's one great sink. There's one great sink everywhere on land. So, the great sink on land is trees. So trees, it's like a beautiful. It's like a beautiful.
It's all being held by the trees, is what you're saying.
The trees.
But there's not just one sink. There's not just trees.
The great sink on land is trees. So that people were. One of the things that we've forgotten is that people were really anxious about climate change in the 1950s because the Earth had been heating up, and it was clear to scientists.
Yeah.
And then when Ravel noticed that Arrhenius had one bit of data wrong. And so by the 1850s at the American Academy for the Advancement of Science, you had the first people offering solutions to this problem. And what the president of the AAAS said is that if we don't do this, otherwise we just get hotter and hotter. And his solution was to plant forests. So you would plant...
In the 50s?
Yeah, in the 50s. You would plant 100 trees for every airplane, 1,000 trees for every airplane, 100 trees for every bus, and 1 tree per car. And if you did that, that would be enough sinks on land to suck in the carbon dioxide and breathe back out oxygen.
So we did the opposite.
Yeah, but the land sink is trees, and the great sink, the larger sink, is the ocean. And so what Arrhenius thought was the oceans would suck up about somewhere around 90% of the excess carbon dioxide we were producing, and then it would release it very slowly. And so that meant that this would happen across centuries. So now by the 1920s, people were noticing that the temperature was getting warmer, so that this issue goes this far back. If you picked up the New York Times in the spring of 1933, the headline was, and it would be between stories about Al Capone and bad stuff in Germany. So on one side, above the fold of the New York Times, to the left of the story is a drive to close down Al Capone's speakeasies, 1920. And we're still in the Prohibition period. And then on the right, there's a story: Germans promised to end attacks on Jews in the Reich. Right. So there's a story about Capone and Hitler, and then in the middle,
that's go on.
Yeah,
and then about climate change.
Yeah. The story is America in longest persistent heat wave in history. Temperatures record 25-year rise. So longest persistent rise in temperatures since 1776 is part of that headline. And then the bottom part is experts are baffled. Yeah, shocking.
I don't even know what to do with that because it puts it in such relief, such great. The Nazis are just building up.
Yeah. Capone is building down, and there we are.
We're still in Prohibition, and we're talking, and those things have come and gone and come and gone.
Yeah.
And here we are we barely moved. In fact, we've moved the wrong way.
No, Deborah, that's why it was reading those things that made me want to write the book. So in the 1950s, Roger Revelle, who is America's leading oceanographer, this has always been science practiced by the Harvards and Yales of science. So he worked. He helped found the Department of Ships during the war. He was a commander in the war, and the Navy. We were talking about Joan Didion also in the green room, and she has this. Writers tend to have one quote that they like to use when they're talking to listeners, and when she was being interviewed, and also when she was writing about Hollywood, she loved this one quote from a Fitzgerald novel that she felt. Yeah, it typified. I want to hear yours before I erase it with a cat's going to walk across the screen.
Oh,
That's a
hello,
cat
kitty.
tail.
Oh, I love that. I
Yeah.
love that. We've had a lot of cat and dog visitors. Well, I
Yeah, I
mean,
like having
when
the
I think of
tail.
her, I just think of the center cannot hold.
Oh yeah, that's that Yeats thing. But
But
the
yeah, yeah,
there's a great thing that Martin Amis said about that. He was making fun of her for liking that quote
yeah.
because she was using it. Um, she was using it in 1969 to talk about how the center wasn't holding in America.
Mm,
That's where the quote. That's where the
okay.
title "Slouching Towards Bethlehem" comes
Mm-hmm.
from. And he said Miss Didion doesn't seem to remember that that poem is from 1919, and so the center hasn't been holding for quite some time.
Mm.
It's one of those great killer.
Yeah, it is a killer, but
Yeah.
it's probably been not holding for even longer than
Yeah,
that.
no, exactly. Great. So the quote that she liked about Hollywood is it was from this Fitzgerald novel called The Last Tycoon. And it's the daughter of one of the studio heads. And what she says is, we don't go for strangers in Hollywood. Right.
Oh,
And she thought that was the key line. And it's true. It explains why there are all the Nepo babies in Hollywood. It explains why the great director Barry Levinson, why his son, Sam Levinson, will become an unbelievably successful director at HBO. It suggests why Lily Rose Depp is an actor. It's just like, we recognize your name, we know you. And that quote is one that, one of the weird things about human life is that we spend our time often discovering the same things. So that Fitzgerald would discover about the Hollywood that he knew in the 30s, we don't go for strangers in Hollywood.
yeah.
And similarly, in science
Crazy.
and in the Army, they don't go for strangers. So the Navy hired Roger Revelle because he was someone that they knew was a brilliant oceanographer to do work in the 50s, in the 40s and 50s. One of the things they hired him to do work on was to test what was going to happen in Bikini Atoll before and after the tests, the atomic bomb, the hydrogen bomb tests.
Yeah.
And that's one of the ways he became an expert in certain things about water. He also was called in because one of the tests had poisoned a Japanese fishing boat called I think either the Lucky or the Happy Dragon. It depends on how you translate it. And that terrified everybody in Japan because these people had been irradiated, and Japan is a piscine. They are pescatology. They are
fish eaters.
Yeah, fish eaters. I was trying to think of they're pescatarian. Yeah. So they didn't want to eat fish from the Pacific.
Right.
So he was brought in to say, hey, actually, that the waters aren't being poisoned by the nuclear tests. But again, climate change has been mixed up with a number of, it's been mixed up with our history for a while.
Yeah.
The thing that the story of that fishing boat called the Dragon became a movie series, and it changed the way movies are made. That was the first Godzilla movie.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So that is how deeply inscribed in current history this issue is. Similarly, we were talking about Nabokov before, and Nabokov, there was so much climate change research going on in the middle of the century because everyone was trying to figure out what's happening to our temperatures. That when Nabokov is trying to figure out a job for the narrator of Lolita to have before he gives in to his terrible hobby, he goes off to work on doing climate research in the Arctic Circle.
Oh, God.
Anyway, but by researching water, Revelle realized, he thought, okay, let's look at, we're depending on Arrhenius's thing that the ocean is going to take up 90% of the carbon dioxide we're making, and we're relying on that. So let's just test it out, because I know certain things about how water holds elements that other people don't. And so he tests it out, and this must have been
the Arctic, up in the Arctic.
Okay. Just in general, just water in general. So all over the planet, carbon dioxide would settle on the surface of the water, and it would be drawn into the water. And so that was what Arrhenius said that it would be centuries before the temperature would start to change, because it would take a while to cycle through all the oceans and then be released back on the surface. Yeah. And so no one had thought to test this. It had been 60 years since Arrhenius published his research in April of 1896.
That's amazing.
So he tests it, and he says, oh, this is good. It will hold the carbon dioxide, But then he thinks about what he learned by walking along the water, like the ankle high beaches and lagoons at Bikini Atoll, testing after the and
Right.
before the hydrogen bomb tests. And water is very allergic to changes in its composition. So the question was not would it absorb the carbon dioxide? It was would it hold it? And it turned out it
Oh,
wouldn't. It would release it
oh.
almost immediately. It would
And for
release it
60
really
years,
quickly.
nobody
Exactly. Yeah.
questioned that.
No, so when people brought up Arrhenius' theory, they would say, yeah, we are producing a lot of carbon dioxide. There's no
But
question that it will heat the Earth in the future. But Arrhenius has pointed out that 90% of it is being absorbed by the ocean, so we don't have to worry. And so,
how these individual people,
yeah, it's a
one
thrilling story.
person,
Yeah,
there's
but
so many scientists. How can
yeah.
there be no one? I mean,
Oh, because everyone accepted it. So, Deborah, that's a great question. But
but
so
it's an infuriating question.
but it was
We're putting the future of the planet for 60 years. I mean, not everyone's looking at it as the future of the planet, but it's a big question. Whether even if one person brought it up, it's a big question. And
but normally you accept the world. Do you ever see the Truman Show?
one of my it changed my life.
Okay,
It freaks me out still. Yeah.
Christoph says we accept. Sorry, we accept the world. No, we accept the world that's given to us. That's what Christoph says when he's being interviewed. Christoph is the Ed Harris character.
But the point is, he didn't.
No, but he doesn't. But he's accepted it for a long time. Like that is the basis of that movie, which is you accept the world as given.
Yeah, but scientists don't. That's the whole irony there. I mean, they just don't. They're like, oh, okay, well, he thought that, so here we are.
But he didn't. So what he was doing was, so what happened if you, okay, this is deeper dive. So people who were, when you were going to the fridge just now and you came back quickly, if you saw something good in the fridge that you were thinking about,
I know
back.
There's nothing in there.
But what had happened was that there was
the way your mind works is fascinating.
It's nice to say.
I didn't. Go ahead. No, it is. It's like being on I don't know, because I'm so ADD and I'm having trouble following. So I don't know.
Seriously?
Are you ADD? Oh yeah. I mean, I'm not actually.
Yeah.
But only because I know all about what you're talking about. If I just dropped in on this, I'm not sure I'd follow.
I bet. Well, we'll leave it to viewers and listeners.
Yes.
Yeah. So what had happened was that you couldn't miss the fact that things were getting warmer. So there was a British scientist named Guy Stewart Callender, and so he, and in the 30s he went to the British Meteorological Society and said, "This is happening," and he counted up. So he is now seen as the first scientist who said that the warming had actually started. And so he spoke in 1936. He addressed the British Meteorological Society, and he said, look, here's how much carbon we've added to the atmosphere, and here's how much Britain has increased. I think that he had seen about a degree Fahrenheit since the Industrial Revolution. And so he's being invited to give a speech to the most learned atmospheric scientists of his time. And they said, Arrhenius points out that can't be happening yet. Right. And so they disregarded him, but people were aware that the temperature was changing. And so essentially what Revell wanted to do, it's about 15 years since Callender's most recent paper, because he was researching this, and then he was invited to help with the British war effort. And so when so the war is over, it is the 1950s. And he thinks, you know what? Let's look at whether Guy Stewart Callender, G.S. Callender was right about whether the heating has started. I'm pretty sure he's wrong. So, in fact, he and a colleague, they decide to investigate to prove that Callender is wrong. And then he does that thing, and he realizes that Callender is right. And so the equation, he wrote in that line that all over the world, we're all participating in a grand geophysical experiment. We are releasing all at once the stored carbon dioxide that were in rocks and trees over millennia. That part of the paper is scotch taped into the manuscript.
Oh my
because it was
gosh.
done like that. That's as hot off the presses as science ever gets. Like he was, so it was a huge
Wow.
moment. And
Yeah.
so, and then
Pivotal.
once that had happened, it wasn't like it was just he published in a academic or in a science journal. He published in Tellus, which is being read. It's funny because it is spelled Tellus,
Oh,
Tellus, but
really?
that isn't
Really?
what that isn't
Huh.
what it's supposed to mean. The other
Oh, it's-
one of the other great atmospheric publications is called Io, which is named after one of the Greek gods of wind.
hmm.
And then there's the Journal of Applied Meteorology. He doesn't just keep it there. He gives an interview to Time magazine. And it's
This
not,
is
and
in
yeah,
now, are we in what,
1956.
56, right? Yeah.
This is
Ravel.
May
Yeah.
28th, 1956.
Uh-huh.
Time magazine, and there's the headline. It's not abstruse.
Yeah.
One big greenhouse is the headline for this story. And what he says to readers of Time magazine is that in 50 years or so, this could have a violent effect on Earth's climate.
Yeah.
So, huge head start. And then in 1979, um, and Roger Revelle is the person who then goes to teach at Harvard, who is one of Al Gore's professors.
Yeah. I missed that connection with
Yeah,
Al
no,
Gore
there
and
it is, right?
Ravel.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's very interesting.
But
Yeah.
then science is very thorough. So for 20 years, people are scrambling over this data and they're testing it. And by the mid 70s, the giant reports start coming in. And what the reports are saying is, yes, this is happening. It's going to start happening very, very soon. It's going to start, the pace of it is going to be picking up. And the National Academy of Sciences publishes its first long study of this in 1977. The Council on Environmental Quality, which is a White House group, they publish a study in the spring of 1979. It's just meant to be read in the White House. And what they say, what the head of the study says to the New York Times is, there's going to be very bad consequences unless mitigating actions are taken immediately. And the person who wrote, 1979, spring of 79, and the person writing it didn't think it was an academic report. What he told the New York Times is that he expected it to be very influential in government circles. But the study,
Excuse me.
the study that really affects the White House in the spring of 1979 is one from the Jasons. Did you see Oppenheimer?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so Manhattan Project, right? Those are the scientists.
Right. Yeah.
So you've got great minds like Arrhenius, Tyndall, and Fourier. They would have been in the Manhattan Project had they been alive in the 40s.
Yeah.
And it helps us win the war. And then in the 50s, they're disbanded when the war is over. And then in the 50s, we are in this long twilight struggle against Russia. And someone gets the idea, hey, let's put the band back together. Like they did great work in World War II. Let's do it again. And so they bring back the veterans of the Manhattan Project and they add new young scientists and they form a new group called Jason. And Jason those are scientists who then pick the other most brilliant scientists, and they are relied on by the defense. Again, this is all mainstream. The science that the deniers made us think was fringe science is all a product of the absolute blue chip mainstream. So the Jasons do work for the defense, basically, for the Pentagon and for the White House. They're like the Justice. They're like Science League America. They're like Justice League America. And so in the 70s, they start investigating this too. And in the spring of 1979, they release their report. And what the report says is this is ominous. And the chairman of the report, because the Jasons are kind of secret, he is listed in the New York Times as the leader of a Department of Energy study, says, again, he says the same thing. The government has to start dealing with this now because it's going to start being bad in the 90s. So President Carter, Democrat and a progressive and environmentalist, he is
and a nuclear scientist.
Yeah, and especially freaked out by the Jasons.
Yeah,
so
by their information, by their
because what they're saying is it's ominous and it's and that we have to deal with it now. So he takes that report, and in the summer of 1979, which is it'll be the 45th anniversary of that report, will be July 29th this summer. He goes to the National Academy of Sciences and says, "Is this really going to happen?" Like you're the National Academy of
Yeah.
Sciences. You are the 2,200 best scientists in America, maybe in the world. Could you form a study group and tell us, is this going to happen? And they reply quickly. It takes about 2 weeks. And this sentence, I think their meetings are about 5 days, but the whole process is fast because it is a fast moving and unfortunate for human beings topic. What they write back is the conclusions of this study will be reassuring to scientists because we've been studying it now since 1859 or 1894, depending on where you want to put one side of the one dot on the video. It'll be reassuring to scientists, but disturbing to policymakers. If the carbon dioxide release continues, this panel finds no reason to believe that climate changes will not result, and no reason to believe that those changes will be negligible. So that is given to the White House, and this was the absolute reason why I felt this was a story that would be thrilling to tell, but one that I would like to read, is that we did nothing after that. So, Deborah.
I just love that you're going through this in the order that you're doing it. I mean, it's a lot from the book as well, but it really helps to put it. And what's popping out to me now that hasn't prior to this time is that I'm thinking of these pivotal moments, like in the 1890s, and what is going on in the country. It really helps us tell the story of why this has been so. It's one of the themes anyway, one of the threads you can follow as to why we have not been able to tame the beast, as it were, because 1890s, a time of, largesse and everything's going well. We've got somebody studying it then, and then, kind of goes down, and then, it seems like it follows. We've got World War I to worry about. We've got World War II to worry about. We've got the Cold War to worry about. And now I'm thinking with Jimmy Carter, we've got, his issues we've got hostages. So everything keeps getting
in the way.
And if you go on with Obama, we'll find out that it's just a matter of other things come up with anyway, but
but what
seems
they
to
were
coincide.
aware what happened, the thing that really made him not act the way the scientists would have preferred.
Jimmy Carter?
Was that it happened during an energy crisis. And so we had to commit to coal. Like we have, at the same time one of the things that the book says is that at a certain point, you have to wonder if God really wants a solution to climate change.
Yeah.
Because of
the bad luck.
Yeah. As the science was coming in, it was the decade of the first energy crisis. And America, one of the slogans that was going around was that America is the Saudi Arabia of coal. We didn't have a lot of oil then, but we had all this coal. Let's dig it. That's the 70s. So you want to see if you can use dig in your slogan. So Carter chose coal. And
later parroted by Sarah Palin.
So
from dig to drill.
So the chairman of the Jason thing, he said that Carter was a disaster. Like he may have been in political sympathy with President Carter, but he thought Carter was a disaster on this issue because we had that tremendous head start.
I mean, you could argue that every single president since.
You could argue
not
successfully,
Biden.
Aside from Biden, you could argue that that's one of the weird things about the story, but every president since
has dropped the ball, has been a disaster. I mean, I love when you talk about Obama because, Obama was a good president and he had to make a choice between healthcare and the environment. I don't know why they had to make that choice. That, to me, I understand they said I think it's wrong manual. You only have enough energy with so to speak, but enough, whatever that word would be, enough political capital, enough money, enough.
It's not just that. So it's like Obama really understood the issue. So a scientist, it was a blind item in the New Yorker. It was in a very long piece, but the scientist isn't named because everyone was very happy that after leadership that was anti-science, because the second George Bush really fought very hard against climate science. In the last 2 years of his presidency, the evidence came in, so he gave up the fight. But when the Times wrote about it, the headline was Bush versus the laureates. And of course, and what they and the Washington Post both reported was nowhere was the battle more pitched than between the president and the climate scientists. Like they were actively trying to keep climate change data from reaching the public because it wasn't beneficial to what the priorities of that administration. So the scientists knew that Obama understood the issue. It's one of the issues that he ran on. And so this one scientist said, it's a tragedy because he clearly knows the science, but he couldn't act on it. And the phrase they used, scientists are full of data. James Buchanan was the last president before the Civil War who tried to stop it from being a war. So what they said is they wonder if Obama will be seen as the James Buchanan of climate because he tried to,
But he has been the reason, I think, that why Biden has been so strong on it. I mean, I think without Obama, Biden would not be as strident as he has been.
I wonder but the reason that they didn't do it is that Obama, or one of the reasons, this is what the scientists think. Like, there's a great scientist named Jim Hansen who said that President Obama gets it, but his advisors don't. But their job, in a way, different expertises have clashed over this. If you are Obama's chief of staff, and Obama's chief of staff is a political wizard named Rahm Emanuel, you see that it's not an issue that helps you win elections. And his job, like a scientist's job, is to tell us, for better or worse, how the world works. And Rahm Emanuel's job, for better or worse, is to keep people of his party elected. And so what he says is, this issue isn't going to win. The slogan of the first Obama term, the inside slogan was success breeds success. We only want to do issues that are winning issues, so that if something isn't going to win immediately, we're not going to pursue it. You were taking a breath preparatory to speech.
It's like reading the book. It can be so infuriating because the thing that you don't get to in the book, well, at least that I didn't read that, you guys. You're like, come on. There's nothing I didn't get to. But the psychology. Why are people putting anything above an existential threat? Even healthcare. Why is or why? I also don't understand why. Yes, greed. If you look at Exxon and Mobil and the heads and all the people who make it happen, why they understand what's going to happen, right? They understand the science. They're denying the science. They know that this is an existential threat to the world. At what point does greed completely obliterate every instinct towards survival for yourself? They have children, they have grandchildren. This is the number one question that I've had for as long as I've thought about this issue. How can Rahm Emanuel, who understands the issue, think that winning is more important than solving climate change?
That is such a great question. You saw me taking notes. And before I was trying to find the exact quote that Gordon MacDonald, that he gave the New York Times in '79, but it was just, we have to deal with this now, right? All the reports were saying this is not a far off thing. We're going to start feeling it in the 90s. So we have to deal with it now. And you saw me taking a huge number of notes while you were talking just now.
Can't imagine what I said that would be worth noting at that point.
Seriously, the basic question, which is why we haven't done anything on this, and you mentioned grandchildren, basically, how could we not?
Yes.
So here's the first thing. Look, the weird thing about the book is that we talked a little bit about the inventors, and we spent a huge amount of time on the scientists.
We talked about the deniers.
What people love the deniers just because one of the things is they're so devious, but they are also they're colorfully transparent. Like they are the stories about the people who were able to stop our progress on this are wild, like them working with the Moonies, right? Or them working with the cigarette industry. I think it's probably better morally to work with the Moonies than with the cigarette industry.
Yeah, man.
So that just commercially, as someone who's talking about a book that they wrote, however fun the science part is, what people love about the book is the second half, which is the story of how denial works. So that bit of commercial business done, the thing that you mentioned is the thing that's become really interesting to me for the last couple of years, which is how could you not take action? And I have some very complicated thoughts about it. They won't come out sounding complicated, but they are socially complicated. Sorry, Deborah.
No, it is complicated. You can't, it's not it seems like it would be so straightforward that it wouldn't be an issue of denial or that anybody would argue for that. It just seems like the most straightforward thing, that survival would be a stronger pull than any of these other reasons. But so go ahead.
I'm sorry. I'm just so excited to talk about this issue, and I'm so excited I'm being a poor guest because you don't.
You're not being a poor guest.
But
I'm interrupting.
No. So a friend of mine who is very committed, a very committed progressive, he went down to work for one of the politicians in Washington, elected representatives, who is very publicly committed to the issue. And it was a great surprise to this person to find out that privately, while publicly this representative would say, we have to cut back on our motor use, we have to cut back on our fuel change, and would suggest that we could help solve it by our behavior. In private, they said something very different. And then when they were talking to other people in the Senate, they were saying a very different thing, which is that they all expect a gadget will solve it. Once you understand that, you understand a lot about how things have worked on this issue. The belief, so that, for example, my friend who, I'm going to use a Yiddish word, cheppy. Cheppying is when you just keep nudging someone, right, in a way that they find irritating.
Yeah.
So there are millions of airplane flights every year. And so my friend who gives a lot of money to environmental causes, when he was being cheppied by our mutual friend about the fact that he wanted to fly home once a month from Ontario.
Right.
That is the position that all good-hearted people have. Like, we should feel guilty for driving to the 7-Eleven or to the Stop and Shop. While there are still Stop and Shops, I think they're going to start closing them. Awful to hear. I just read that in the newspaper yesterday. But that we should walk. It's better, obviously, for us physically to walk, but that it's better for the planet if we walk. And that we know that the people whom we depend on to set the tone, that they would prefer that we walk. But in fact, the people who set the tone, not the climate scientists, but our representatives, our leaders, what they believe is that a gadget is going to come along, that there will be the stunning appearance of an Act 3 gadget that will solve the problem.
That's quite a gamble to
huge gamble, but that explains, once you know that. So there was a moment, and the reason I was writing down grandchildren is that the scientists have wondered the same question you've wondered. And so there was, do you know how former President Clinton had that thing called the Clinton Initiative, where they would meet, the Clinton Global Initiative. They would meet every year, and they would sort of like a mini Davos, and they would have people, and they would have forums. So Walmart found that they could make a lot of progress by talking about this issue. So that in the late, you see, I'm laughing because
this money.
It's a lot of it is money, and this the book began to seem to me like one of those great funny novels like Catch-22, which is just here's how we are living now. So Walmart in the around 2006 or 7, Walmart was being attacked properly. No offense, Walmart. I know you've sold books of mine, and thank you for that. But they were being attacked for low wages, for terrible healthcare, and for supply chains in China as opposed to here. China pollutes more, and also we do want to keep jobs here. So that was when they committed to environmental sustainability. And a reporter from the Times, people will say anything to reporters. She was interviewing the head of Walmart. And what the head of Walmart said very frankly is that we found we had less room to change on issues like wages and healthcare than there is on this issue of environmental sustainability. So that we can look better. We can't make ourselves look better by actually changing what Walmart is, but if we do environmental work, we can do better on that. We can be more effective.
Yeah. So what? So
But let me.
go ahead. Finish.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So they instantly, we found there was more room for maneuver on this issue of
Right.
environmental sustainability. So Walmart instantly named a vice president in charge of sustainability, and they put it around. They released press things. They
Hmm.
released a press
Yeah.
release saying that even this man's business card was only 2/3 normal size, but 100% recycled cardboard.
Hmm.
So, and so that their vice president of sustainability was speaking in 2009 at the Clinton Global Initiative
Hmm.
with the head of Timberland, and was saying things that Walmart was doing, small things that made the head of Timberland enthuse. And then there was a scientist from the Nature Conservancy who was looking more and more like if you're having brunch or if you're having dinner with friends of yours and one
Yeah.
of them knows a nasty secret about one of the others and the other one is saying something about how nobody should step out on their husband or wife, right? And someone over there who knows something about their personal life keeps grinning more and more broadly.
Yeah.
And so the
Yeah. Yeah.
scientist from the Nature Conservancy is smiling because the vice president of sustainability from Walmart is talking about grandchildren and how the reason why this is all important and why Walmart is doing all this stuff is for everyone's grandchildren. And finally, the scientist from the Nature Conservancy says, you know what? I hear this all the time, but what I've learned in the last 10 or 20 years is that clearly we don't care about our grandchildren that much, right? Because clearly we haven't
Exactly
met them. Yeah,
correct.
yeah. And so the
Yes.
fascinating, yeah.
Yeah. It's
No, please go
it's
ahead.
like,
Yeah,
oh, it's just also every time we talk about it, I don't know what to do with my emotions around this because I really do care about my grandchildren. I really do. I mean, I feel like I heard you speak at, I don't think this was in the book, but it was either in the book or else I heard you say this on an interview somewhere that you were talking about COVID and you said
yeah,
that within 2 weeks, we changed, we did everything
yeah,
that they wanted us to do, from staying home to not driving to
yeah.
stopping our
Shocking.
lives. In
Yeah,
2 weeks, the whole world just suddenly could follow directions because it seemed important to the longevity of all of us and survival of all of us. And no one, what has bothered me about this climate issue for many, many years, for 30, for as long as I can remember, is that nobody ever asked us to do anything.
that's
You were
right.
talking earlier about the oil embargoes in the 70s, I guess it was, when lines were very long and for
73 and
gas. And
79. Yeah,
I remember that in downtown Denver, all the skyscrapers were dark. They were dead. All the lights that we used to have on all the time, they turned them off. Didn't have to, but we were conserving. Nobody was no, and now they ever since then all the lights are on and all the skyscrapers. Even though we've got global warming, which is much more serious than running out of some, fuel. So maybe not heating fuel, but it just seems like a bigger issue.
huh.
So, and no one asked us to do it. So we're voluntarily, and what you've been revealing is that at the end of the story, we're whether you're Walmart or the head of Exxon or whoever you are more concerned about your own life. You say, well, hopefully a gadget's going to come along. So, if it doesn't, well, too bad for the grandchildren. It's kind of what it is. So we're very myopic. We're very self-concerned. But if all we have to do is have someone say to us, let's cut back, not let's go out and shop. So why doesn't anyone ask us to make some sacrifices for global warming? I think we would do it. I think we would all do it.
I think
But
we
we
would
have to
too, but
be
ask,
lassoed.
yeah, that was the thing that was very fascinating to me during COVID, which is, yeah, 2 weeks with almost no preparation, but out of self-concern and also out of a wonderful group concern, people stayed home, and when they went outside, they wore masks. It changed to almost every element of how we were living
Right.
before
Immediately.
before March of 2020, and then by April and May of 2020. It was shocking and wonderful, right? And it shows even
Yeah.
that we are eager in the same way that we all rose to the occasion of World War II. I think there's some
Right.
part of us that actually likes to be
I
asked
do too.
to act in a big group.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things I learned when I was at West Point, there's something in us that wants to act in a group for the good of the group. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but
Yeah.
I also think so. The reason that I had one of those wicked smiles that I imagine that I imagine you were visualizing for the scientists from the Nature Conservancy, is that the denial movement, so the scientists themselves, they were really active, the deniers. They were denying about about atmospheric science since the 80s, and especially on this issue since the early part of the 90s. They were basically beaten they were mostly beaten by 2009, so that when they were being profiled by the Times and by the UK Guardian at their annual convention, they were saying it's almost a lost fight. Like, we know that we're beaten. Because in 2007, the international scientific community had said there's no question about this science anymore. There were reports that would come in every 5 to 6 years that would say, what's the state of our certainty on this? And in February of 2007, hey, we are double, quadruple sure on this. So they were basically dead, like the villain in any good horror film. They rose, even though they'd been shot or they have a stake in their heart, they rose for one final assault in the early part of the teens. But they really haven't been a factor since, I would say, 2016 or 2017. So that means that I've come to think of it, and I wonder if this is your feeling about it too, that in a way, it was nice for us to say this is Exxon's fault, or this is a political party's fault, or this is just our, industry in general's fault. But clearly we don't want to do anything about it. Like, the deal that we get from fuel is an amazing one. Again, I'm talking to you through a piece of glass, and there are cars going by, and there is illumination in both of our homes, at both of our desks. And those things would change if we were to suddenly end our reliance on fossil fuels, on carbon-based fuels. And we have all decided that we don't care about our grandchildren that much. So one of the funny things to me is that once the deniers were gone, we had to face something, which is, we don't care about this issue that much.
That's so huge.
Yeah.
I didn't think of, well, we don't. Well,
we don't.
Wow.
Like,
You're
it
right.
is, it's like, it's not, even if you're polling college students, it is second to the bottom. When they were polling college students during during the demonstrations in support of Gaza, one of the things that Gallup and the Harvard poll, I forget who Harvard was working with, but they said actually for most college students, this is low on the list. They are interested in jobs and in unemployment and inflation. So, and climate and Gaza were towards the bottom of that list. And similarly, sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm just guffawing, or I'm whatever.
No, guffawing is right. Like, well, because like when people bring up, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, I guess what I want to say is that when you think about Gaza, or you think about what was the other topic? Climate change. Those are two things.
By the way, but think of the other topic is a great way to ask about it. But the other topic.
I just couldn't. I mean, but I'm thinking that this is all driven by media. I mean, we're so much of where our focus is just like, we're like squirrel. We're just constantly being led about what's important, and so that's what's
the brilliant writer George Sykes got excited because this is a very cool conversation. So George Saunders is a great fiction and nonfiction writer, and he said that essentially that the way the media works is like a brain dead person with a megaphone. So that you're at a party. His image was you're at a party and you're having any number of conversations that might be cool, but someone with a megaphone comes over and says, the Kardashians, they're splitting up, or we're going to war in Iraq, or we were selling arms. So whatever else you're trying to talk about, the megaphone is saying something very loudly. So almost against your will, you'll be like, well, what about, what about how the NCAA characterizes athletes, or what about the primary season? So that you can't really focus. So so his description of that is as a brain dead megaphone.
Well, that's frightening, but I think if you're a writer and you're a journalist, that shows you the height of the responsibility. Because don't you feel like the media is honestly what draws our attention to what's happening?
It is. I mean, I'm sorry, Deborah.
I'm just saying, there's people coming out and they're making proclamations and they're, like say DeSantis comes out and says we can't mention climate change anymore. Well, it's not a story until all the media makes it a story. Now I'm talking about it. It's a story.
It's fascinating too, because it's real 2000. That's real 2004 stuff. But yes, the media determines what we're going to be talking about.
Yeah, yeah. And who determines what the media is talking about? That's the real question.
But with the I don't know if you've observed this, but one of the things that I observe is that when the issue comes up, um, people can tell what issues actually matter because they're the ones that we take action on. So when politicians run on when national politicians run on tax cuts, within a few months of taking office, they cut taxes. And when local politicians run on either zoning issues or on school board issues, within a few months of them taking their seat at one of those dioceses, they are introducing the very changes they ran on. And so I think people have noticed that even though we've been discussing a solution to climate since the early part of the 90s, they can tell no one's done anything, right? There has been, no one's asked people to stay home. No one's asked them really to drive less. No one has said, nationally, we're setting a priority on this. And so I think that they understand we're smart. We accept the world that we're given, to go back to the Truman Show.
Yeah.
And so I think when you bring this issue up to people, test it the next time you're talking about it with someone not talking to you through a pane of glass in New York City. But when you bring it up, their face, they try to look solemn, and their voice changes to their solemn tone. And it's a little bit like you've told them that a relative that they forgot they have is sick. And they're like, oh yeah, is somebody doing anything about that? Right?
That's so funny.
Yeah, but it's not, they don't have, and then they wait, they're hoping the topic will go away because they can tell that we have decided not to do anything about this.
Gosh.
And
I don't know. I thought you were go ahead. When you were
that's why I was saying, when you were asking if there was some question that I wanted to be asked about, that was why I wanted to be asked about this. So that when you talk to the climate scientists, a lot of them have that little smile, that wry veteran smile. So do you know that phrase? Do you know the phrase "Brave New World"?
Oh, well, sure.
Okay. So that comes from Shakespeare's last play, or what's seen as his last play, The Tempest. And at the end of that play, the plot of that play, this should only take 20 seconds, but it's fascinating because everyone knows the quote. So Prospero was Duke of Milan. And then his brother decided, hey, I'd like to be Duke of Milan. So he decides that he's going to try to kill Prospero and his daughter. And so Prospero and his daughter, he gets wind of it, and he takes his infant daughter to an island that is far from everything. And he raises her alone on the island. He is also a magician, although Arthur C. Clarke had this great quote about technology. Any technology sufficiently advanced will just seem like magic. So we could think of him as being one of the inventors. But anyway, he's living on this island alone. And when Miranda, his daughter, is about 16, there's a ship is passing by that has all the villains who stole his dukedom from him. And he creates a storm, the tempest of the title, that brings all these people who wanted to murder him and took all his stuff, that bring them to the island where he is living with a few other people, with two magical creatures, basically, and his daughter. And so they're all dressed really well. They're dressed like contemporary Milan. They look great. They look like people who are going to the Met Gala, whereas Prospero and his daughter, probably don't look so hot. They're wearing
fig leaves.
they're wearing whatever I'm blanking on this. I'm blanking on the star of Castaway.
The story of the Castaways.
Tom Hanks. So they're wearing Tom Hanks fashions, and there are all these people who are they were going back to Milan, so they're dressed great. But they're all the people who tried to murder, who tried to murder Prospero and his infant daughter. But when she sees them, she doesn't know that. And so what she says is, oh, brave new world that has such people in it. And then now everyone forgets what Prospero says. He says, yeah, it's new to you. He says, 'tis new to thee, is what he responds. And so that wry smile of 'tis new to thee is how the scientists look. Like, this issue is no longer new to them. And so a lot of them thought that that the weather last summer would confirm what everybody had been saying about the dangers we were running, and that would lead to action. That's what everyone felt, and that's how the news was being reported last summer.
Yeah.
And then nothing happened again. And
Right.
so if you talk to climate scientists now, they have that wry smile of, I think they're not going to do anything.
I think they know.
Yeah. Because they have seen it's not new to them anymore. Like there have been every time they're told there's a milestone, like if that report in 2007 says there's no question that's happening, there will be action then. Or if we get the right people in office, there'll be action then. Or if there are finally things that clearly are climate related, absolutely disastrous changes to our environment, then there'll be action.
Like the melting of the ice shelves and things like that. Well, now we passed that. No, I mean, if you think that half or more of the country is going to vote for a man who pulled us out of the Paris Climate Agreement, that's your answer, right? I mean, that's how that can even be a thing is so hard to absorb. And actually, we really probably do have to end this because we're like, I don't know, something like 45 minutes over our time.
As well we should be, by the
way. Which is fine with me. That's the story of my life. But what am I thinking about? I lost my whole train of thought thinking about the time.
You were saying that the country is willing to vote for someone, but
that you've been talking. I've heard people interview you, and they ask you if you're optimistic, and you say yes, because you also, it sounds like, have come to the conclusion that we've been stuck here for 70 years with this problem, and that we are going to figure our way out of it. That's also where you've landed, I assume. I'm thinking.
No, there's two different. To me, more it's just like. There's no better representation of how we've evolved as a group than this issue, which is that we tend to think that talking about something is the equivalent of acting on it. So It's like, hey, at least we're having the conversation.
Right.
It's like, no, it's not. And that can work in any human thing. Like if you're having relationship trouble, if you have a family thing, talking is action. But the climate is just the result of a number of physical equations, and it really doesn't matter whether we're talking about it or not. It just is affected by the things that we do. So that to me, it is fascinating that we could be told with more and more certainty that we are making the place where we live less good, and that we could all agree every time we raise our voices as one, we could all agree that this is the most serious issue. And then that we could choose not to do anything about it is such a great thing. It's like a mirror. It's like the issue is one of those mirrors that they have at a store that you like in the mall holy shit, forgive my cursing, that mirror is being way more honest with me than I'd like a mirror to be. Somehow the mirrors at home, the mirror in the foyer, the ones in my home mirrors, those know how to talk to me. But that mirror in the dressing room, that mirror doesn't have a vocabulary with me yet. And this issue is like that. It shows us what we actually care about. But I'm optimistic. We can do, we created an electricity-based planet. We reconfigured the whole planet that way in less than a century. So that you could also argue that our leaders are fairly well versed, and if they feel that there's going to be rescue, that Superman or Superwoman will come in the form of a gadget, maybe they're correct to think so. So in that respect, just in history, we have tended to be able to invent our way out of things. But as a story about us, this is everything. Like, we don't seem to be able to solve. People keep bringing up the same issues about education, and we don't seem to be able to solve that. There are repeating issues like immigration. Clearly, we need new citizens. We also need to have a way to process them with which, a system with which everyone is comfortable. And however much we talk about that, that's been an issue for as long as I've been alive. Everyone is aware that there's something wrong with how much money we're borrowing. And everyone gets that same sound, and we just keep borrowing it. So that we have achieved as a people this tremendous ability to speak with unbelievable fluency and expertise about things. And we have come to tell ourselves that that is the equivalent of acting on a problem. And again, what a great story to get to tell. Like, this is the best version because the thing is happening before our eyes, and we just keep talking about it in more beautiful and flowing tones.
Wow. Well, so I don't know how that left you an optimist.
Oh no! So the optimism is human ingenuity is amazing. Edison and
Yeah.
Tesla changed the world in a single generation.
Yeah.
But otherwise, the part of me that likes to smile, the part of us. So there's another thing that you also write, so you'll know how true this is. Hemingway said that what all writers are very different, but what they all have in common is a built-in bullshit detector, right? And there's the pleasure just in reading anything or in writing about something where you're calling bullshit, right? And this is an issue where there is the pleasure of that scientist on stage with the vice president of sustainability from Walmart saying, clearly, I don't think we care about our grandchildren that much. And there's something that feels good about telling. Here's another literary quote. Do you know John Updike, that writer?
Sure. Yeah.
He said that one thing that made him such an incisive writer is that he and his parents they all shared a taste for the jubilant, horrible truth, which is just saying the thing, right? And so that just that's a relief. It feels good in a way. So that's the part that's optimistic. Please go ahead, Deborah.
It's just funny because I am finishing the final edit, I think, on a novel that I'm writing about climate change, and it's about the island of Tuvalu, or the island nation of Tuvalu. And so I understand exactly what you're talking about. It's just that, same thing. They've known since the 80s that their islands are going to be uninhabitable if climate change continues. And just there's something, when you can't do something about a thing on your own, it's really nice to write something about it and just say, look, we did know, we did, just for whoever someday reads this, we did know this was all happening, and we do have feelings about it, and there are some of us who really, really, really do care, and there's some satisfaction in writing, at least. And honestly, I mean, maybe you look like you want to say something, and then I was going to say that's probably a good segue to wrap this up with talking about your book again, but go ahead, interrupt me.
No, I was just agreeing with you vociferously, but no, I was excited by what you were saying. So no.
No, I guess I just wanted to say that, you had your reasons for wanting to write the book, but there are many reasons for wanting to read this book, because I think if we've even piqued anybody's interest about the history of climate change, like just that alone would be a great reason to read this book. That, to read about the inventors gives us what you were just referring to, some hope that ingenuity will be the thing that will pull us through. But to read about the deniers, or, not the deniers, but the scientists who have tried so hard and continue to try so hard. I mean, I feel like we owe it to all these people to read the book and to really know what's been going on, like step by step by step, and who's done what. I learned a lot about Jim Hansen. I'm going to put a link to his TED Talk on the show notes. Great. These wonderful scientists who have just begged us, and now they're getting older and, can see that nothing's been done. But I think we owe it to them to at least learn the story and to be able to be on the lookout for deniers when they happen in any industry or in any situation, whether cigarette smoke or climate change or anything else.
I totally agree. But the reason I was smiling was that Hansen, throughout his career, and he came on board, he was one of the first scientists after Revell to say this is happening now. And so he was following the issue from the late 70s on, and he was the first person to announce in Congress that the global warming has been detected and it is changing our climate now. That was in June of 1988. It was a giant moment because the scientists, they're cautious. They could see that it was happening, but nobody wanted to be the person who would say it absolutely is happening. So that's almost 40 years ago. That is 36 years ago this month, June of 1988. And what Hansen, when they asked him, how come you were willing to speak up on this? what he said was he didn't want to be grandchildren again. He didn't want to be in a situation where his grandchildren said, Grandpa knew this was happening, but he didn't make it clear. And so he would always say that would be his line in interviews. That would be his version of, we don't go for strangers in Hollywood. And he retired from NASA. So he was America's leading climate
NASA scientist, yeah.
Yeah, and so he would testify in the Senate. He would brief presidents. And when he retired, he said this haunting, kind of beautiful thing. He said, what I've determined is clearly I didn't make this clear enough for people because nothing has happened. And what he said
that's
is,
not true.
Yeah, but it's a killing thing. So like that, there's something great about, I think that the way action is going to come is if we stop to some degree allowing ourselves to accept that talking is a kind of action and to say, look, actually nothing is happening on this issue. Because as long as we're saying, oh, good, people are talking about it, something is being done, there won't be any drive to saying, hey, we need to do this now because this is becoming a less and less fun. This is becoming a less and less fun world to walk from my house to the store in.
Right. And I bet, I think that if people were listening, they might say, well, but things are being done. Like we're trying, we have these goals, 2030 and, have so many. So there are many things being done just to not act as though there are not and dismiss them.
But here's the fascinating thing about that. I know that we were supposed to say
Go
goodbye.
Ahead. Sorry.
I did want to, we had a conversation before about quoting stuff, which I think would be sort of interesting. So yes, there are things being done. There are trillions, tens of trillions of dollars being invested in green technology because industry always likes to make new cash. So think how much money was generated by all of us adopting small portable computers that we could also occasionally use to make phone calls on, right? Trillions of
phone
dollars.
Calls. People don't make those anymore.
But trillions of dollars were generated that way. So of course, if you are putting around stimuli, right, environmental stimuli, that is a kind of action. But just what you said, in 2018, in the fall of 2018, there was a hugely influential report from the UN body that gives us, that it both examines climate science and then issues those 5 to 6 year updates and then will send out essentially bulletins. And in 2018, they said that we had 12 years to cut our carbon emissions by 45%.
Are you talking about
the intergovernmental panel on climate change?
Yes,
the IPCC.
That's the reason there's an acronym.
IPCC would be an easy way to remember it. Just semi-easy.
National Panel on Climate Change.
Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change.
Yeah.
So they said it was a big deal. It was the headlines everywhere. What's the main Colorado paper? Not the Rocky Mountain.
Denver Post.
Yeah, Denver Post, of course. But the Denver Post, I'm sure it was the cover and editorials in the Denver Post, which is, we have 12 years to keep the warming in limits that will be unpleasant but not awful, and it will require a cut in international emissions of 45%. So we had between 2018 and 2030. We are halfway there. How much do you think we've cut them?
Well, by what? By the country, by the world on a global standard? I don't know why I asked for that specification because I don't know.
They're up. We haven't cut them. So the thing that we do is we will have these giant reports. It's big news. It feels like progress is being made. It's the illusion of progress. But we're halfway to. We had to get 45%. We're nowhere near there. And that's part of why people tune out, because they remember that there have been warnings like that in the past, that if we wanted to affect future weather positively or cease to affect it detrimentally, we had to do a certain number of cuts by a certain time, and we never do them, and we just roll through. And so that's why people's voices get fake sounding when they're talking about this issue, and why their faces look fake, because they have determined maybe all people are writers. They have good bullshit. They have excellent bullshit detectors too. And they realize that to some degree it's a bullshit issue. It's the most serious issue, but it's being treated, it's giving advantage to people in various ways. Like, you'll vote for the politician who says they'll do something and then they won't do something, or you'll buy the products of the large big box store who says that they will make their business cards smaller, even if as a whole they continue to pollute. And I think people have caught on to that, basically.
You said before we started, I said I wanted to ask if there's any question that people ask you or people don't ask you that you wish they would. And you said it was more that you had a question that you wish that people do ask you and that you don't like, which is there some good news you can leave us with?
Yeah.
Why don't you like that? So that's going to be our ending question.
No, but that was because like there isn't. It's requiring people to have good news about something.
Yeah. Okay. That's what I wondered. Yeah.
It's the weirdest thing. So that the ritual and if the ritual had worked, it would be great. So that when scientists would come on and they would say, "This is looking not great. I don't think we're doing anything about this.
Yeah.
We keep putting more of this into the atmosphere. I think we should act on this." And then the host of the show, understanding the grammar and protocol and politeness of news, would say, "Can you leave our viewers with something good?"
They do it every night on the news,
good.
right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, cute puppies at the end.
Exactly. But that hasn't worked. Like we haven't. That hasn't led to action on this issue, effective action on this issue. So that,
and one could say that, so why are they doing that at the end of the news show? It's so that people will come back the next day and listen to half an hour of bad news.
Yeah, and Deborah, brilliant.
And that's also we don't want to do that. You don't want to sell more books because people are happy, and I don't want to have more viewers because people got a pablum at the end of the thing. No, it sucks. We're in a bad way.
But that's how what we know from our personal lives is that's actually how action comes. When people
with
say
being positive,
with saying, "Holy shit! Like this is actually a bad situation on me." To the degree that people keep saying it's good, it's going well, then we're like, "Oh, okay."
It's counterproductive. Yeah,
but the people I know well personally, effective, positive change has come to them when actually they've said, "Holy God, this has gotten way out of hand and we have to do something now." And so that's the reason why.
But they also have to have some optimism, because this is the other thing, is that if everyone thinks that we are completely screwed and there is no way out of this, then no one tries anything. So it's a balancing act, right? You have to understand that it's a very serious issue that we have not solved, and there's no two ways about that. And second of all, there has got to be some room for hope. Yes, little boy in the purple shirt.
I think of it. I have a lot of friends who went through recovery, and I got to know a lot about recovery professionally. Mm-hmm. And they don't say you're supposed to be optimistic. What they say is you touch bottom and then you come in, right? Like if you've known people who you had to intervene with, it's not that you say you're doing a good job with this on your own.
I see.
Right?
Yeah.
You don't do that. So that in fact, in situations where useful change has been affected, it's because people say the situation is bad. Like with COVID, they didn't say you're doing good, keep doing what you're doing. It's like, no, you've got to change the way you're acting right now. And when
that's interesting.
One of the great, I mean, it was super violent, but one of the great things, one of the great comings together was the way we fought World War II, because everybody understood they had to change the way they were living and begin living in a very, very different way in very, very different locations. People who weren't going to work in factories were going to be working in factories. People who were working in factories were going to put on uniforms and find themselves in unpredictable locations holding very different kinds of instruments. But it wasn't because everyone said, "Oh, the way we're dealing with this is okay." It's like this is a clear and present danger to which we have to respond.
Those examples that you're giving, though, all came from powers that be. The government said, here's what's going on with COVID. Here's what's going on with World War II. That's where it had. I mean, I said media earlier, but we do have to have some direction, because most people don't know what the heck to do. Drive less, but, so we need some direction. And that isn't going to come from volunteering.
Exactly, but if people are saying, "Oh, we're talking about it, it's good," that is bad, because there aren't going to be people saying we need to deal with this right now. So, for example, gay marriage. The government was going slower. President Obama was great on gay issues, but they felt that they were trying to introduce civil unions and they were trying to solemnize on the federal scale civil unions. And the American people were way ahead of them. They were like, no, we all know and love. We all have gay siblings, gay friends, and we want them to. They want to be married. We want them to be married. So we're not going to go on your timetable. And that happened way faster than anybody had predicted in government. That's the kind of thing I'm talking about.
Good.
But
I love that.
Yeah, if you had told people we're making good progress, it's great, we still wouldn't have gay marriage.
Really, that is a great note to end on. Because so what you're just basically saying is it's up to us. And that's an empowering thing.
You found an empowering.
Can I go now?
Yes, you can go now. Please, you can go.
But right? And that is our final. That's the message. That's the message of this book. That's the message of this conversation.
Sideways, though, you're holding it up. I have the galley, which will look like yours. So this is what the galley looks like. So yes, that's the message of this book. So this is different. So before a book comes out, if you look, I don't know if you can see, this is what you send to book reviewers and bookstores.
Yeah.
So this is the thing this is the prop that I have to look like a paperback.
I can loan you the book if you want.
Please do. Deborah, that could not have been more fun. Obviously, there's more that I would like to say about this, but I am watching the time too.
Yeah. So. Well, we're at 2 hours. We're a full. We've doubled it, so that's good. Let's not do that with climate with the ozone.
Well said.
All right, my dear. Thank you. This was really, really helpful.
Really great.
Really educational and mostly fun, which we should have more fun with these topics. Take care. Great. And I'm going to go look at all your other books and movies now and see what you're really all about.
I hope you like them. That couldn't have been better, Deborah. Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.